All right, welcome to another deep dive. This time, we're tackling psoriasis, but with a twist. We're looking at it through the lens of Ayurveda.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. You actually sent in a research article from the Journal of Ayurvedic and Herbal Medicine.
Oh, right.
So it seems like you're really interested in alternative perspectives on this condition.
Yeah, definitely.
This article compares modern dermatology with Ayurveda. I think it would be fascinating to see those two worlds kind of come together.
Yeah.
So let's start with the basics. I mean, we all know what psoriasis is, right?
Yeah.
It's a chronic skin disease.
Mm.
You get those itchy, scaly patches. I've even heard it described as like an immune system issue.
Right, yeah. Modern medicine really emphasizes that immune system connection with psoriasis, but Ayurveda, this ancient Indian system of medicine, uses the term Kushtha to describe, well, actually a bunch of different skin conditions. Some of them line up with what we call psoriasis today.
Kushtha. That sounds kind of intense. Is it like a super specific term for psoriasis or is it more general?
It's more general. The word Kushtha basically means something that makes the skin, you know, disgraceful or ugly. I know that might sound a little harsh to modern ears, but it really shows how much emphasis they put on the social impact of skin conditions, even back then.
Wow.
And, within Ayurveda, Kushtha has all these different subtypes.
Okay, so how do they figure out which type of Kushtha someone has? Do they do like biopsies or lab tests like in Western medicine?
Not exactly. That's where the Ayurvedic concept of doshas comes in. It's a system of three basic energies, vata, pitta, and kapha.
Okay.
Each one has specific qualities, like vata is associated with movement and dryness. Pitta is more about heat and transformation. And then you have kapha, which is all about stability and moisture.
So is everyone like a mix of all three of these doshas? Is it about how they're balanced?
Exactly. We all have our own unique combination of those three. And in Ayurveda, disease happens when the doshas get out of whack.
Out of whack.
Yeah, like imbalanced. Certain types of Kushtha are linked to specific dosha imbalances. The research paper you sent in actually focuses on three types of Kushtha that are really similar to psoriasis.
Oh, okay. I'm curious. What are those three types and how do they actually, differ in terms of symptoms?
Sure, so there's Sidhma Kustha. That one's characterized by white or coppery patches, often on the chest. Then there's Kitibha Kustha. That one looks like rough, hard patches, kind of blackish brown. And finally, there's Eka Kustha. That one has patches that look like fish scales, and people with that type often don't sweat in those areas.
Wow, fish scales, no sweating. That's wild. You definitely wouldn't hear that from your dermatologist.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing those outward symptoms aren't the only things they look at in Ayurveda, right?
Right.
I mean, modern medicine talks about genetics and environmental triggers for psoriasis.
Yeah, it's not just about the symptoms you see. They also factor in things like diet, lifestyle, and even what they call karma actions from past lives.
Past lives. Wait, seriously? That's a whole different way of looking at it. How do they even incorporate that into treatment?
It's a pretty complex concept, and we could probably do a whole other deep dive just on that.
I bet.
But basically, in Ayurveda, they see your health as a reflection of your actions in this life and previous ones, and they believe that part of healing involves addressing those past imbalances.
Wow. This is already shaping up to be one of our most thought-provoking deep dives yet.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about how Ayurveda views Kustha, but what are the causes? The article you sent mentioned food as a potential trigger. Does that line up with Ayurveda?
Definitely. Diet and lifestyle are super important in Ayurveda. They call them Haraja and Viharaja Nidana, and they see them as major factors in Kustha.
So what kind of dietary advice does Ayurveda give for Kustha? What should people avoid?
Well, this might surprise you. They advise avoiding new rice, heavy foods that are hard to digest, citrus fruits, and even buffalo milk.
Buffalo milk. Seriously.
I know, right? It's not exactly something you see at the supermarket, but it's common in some parts of the world. They believe those specific foods can really mess with the doshas and potentially lead to skin problems. And it's not just diet. They also think that things like sleeping during the day, too much sun, holding back natural urges, and excessive worry can all play a role.
It's really interesting how much Ayurveda focuses on that mind-body connection. Modern medicine is starting to recognize that more too, but it seems like Ayurveda has been onto that for centuries.
That's so true. It's fascinating to see how both traditions are coming to that understanding, that our physical, emotional, and mental states are all linked.
Yeah. And speaking of connections, the research paper also mentions strep infections as a possible trigger for a specific type of psoriasis called guttate psoriasis. Have you heard of that connection before?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting how even conventional medicine is finding these links between seemingly unrelated health issues, isn't it?
It really makes you realize how complex and interconnected our bodies are. So we've gotten a good overview of how both modern medicine and Ayurveda view the causes of psoriasis or Kustha. But what about treatment? Where do the two traditions differ and where do they potentially, overlap?
That's where things get even more interesting. The article talks about conventional treatments like topical creams, light therapy, and medications, but it also dives into the world of Ayurvedic remedies, which are pretty fascinating.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me about the Ayurvedic approach to treating Kustha.
Well, Ayurveda focuses on two main things: cleansing and pacifying. They call them Shahana and Shamana therapies. Shahana aims to get rid of toxins and imbalances, while Shamana is about calming things down and restoring harmony.
So kind of like hitting the reset button and then gently nurturing the body back to a balanced state.
Exactly. But the actual treatments themselves can be pretty surprising. Like, they use techniques like bloodletting to purify the blood.
Bloodletting. Wow, that sounds intense. Is that still a common practice?
And maybe not so much these days, but it has a long history in many traditional systems of medicine. And then they also use these special herbal preparations. One example from the article mentions a mix of rosiana, a type of herbal extract, and cow urine.
Wait, cow urine. Okay, I gotta admit, that one's a little hard to wrap my head around.
I understand. Some of these traditional remedies can seem pretty out there from a modern perspective, but remember, Ayurveda has a completely different understanding of the body and nature, and within that system, these treatments have their own logic and reasoning behind them.
Yeah, that's true. It's important to remember that what might seem weird or strange to us can be totally normal and effective in another context.
Exactly. And it's a good reminder to approach these different systems of knowledge with an open mind. One thing I find really interesting about Ayurveda is that treatment is highly individualized. It's not one size fits all. They consider the specific type of kusta, the person's overall health, and their unique constitution to create the best treatment plan for them.
So it's like a totally personalized approach. That's pretty cool. I mean, who wouldn't want that?
Right. It's a really fascinating aspect of Ayurveda, and it makes you wonder how we could integrate that kind of personalized approach into modern medicine.
That's a great point. It seems like there's a lot of potential for those two worlds to learn from each other. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's shift gears a bit and dive into that second source you sent in. The one from the Journal of the American Osteopathic Association about the epidemiology of psoriasis.
Oh, yeah, that one.
It feels like we're just scratching the surface here, and I'm really excited to see what other insights we can uncover.
Me too. That article is packed with information about psoriasis from a purely scientific perspective. It gives us a really good big picture view of the condition.
Awesome. Let's jump right in and see what we can find.
So this article really dives into the prevalence of psoriasis. It kind of paints a striking picture, Like, did you know that over 8 million adults in the U.S. alone have psoriasis?
8 million. Wow, that's a huge number. You don't always realize how widespread it is. It makes you wonder how many people are dealing with it every day, and how it affects their lives.
Right. And the article doesn't just focus on the numbers. It also talks about the impact of psoriasis, like the psychological and social aspects. A lot of people face stigma, discrimination, even isolation because of it.
That's so sad to hear. I mean, we already talked about how Ayurveda recognizes that social stigma, but to hear that it's still happening today it's really eye-opening. It shows how psoriasis affects so much more than just your physical body.
Absolutely. It impacts people's emotional well-being, their relationships, even their work life.
Yeah, it makes that whole Ayurvedic perspective we talked about seem even more relevant. Their approach is all about the interconnectedness of our physical, emotional, and even spiritual well-being.
Totally. And speaking of connections, this article goes into the whole thing about comorbidities, diseases and conditions that often show up alongside psoriasis.
Oh, right. I remember reading about that. Yeah. It's almost like having psoriasis can increase your risk for other health problems, right?
Exactly. And some of the connections are pretty surprising. Like, did you know there's a strong link between psoriasis and cardiovascular disease?
Really. So people with psoriasis are more likely to have heart problems.
Yeah, things like heart disease, stroke, high blood pressure.
Wow. I would never have made that connection, skin condition and heart health.
It really highlights how different systems in the body can affect each other. It just goes to show the importance of looking at the whole person, which, again, is very much in line with that holistic view of Ayurveda.
It is. So is cardiovascular disease the main concern?
It's a big one, but there are others too. The article also mentions a higher rate of metabolic syndrome in people with psoriasis.
Can you remind me what metabolic syndrome is again?
Sure, it's basically a group of conditions like high blood pressure, high blood sugar, extra fat around the waist, and abnormal cholesterol levels. And having metabolic syndrome significantly increases the risk of serious health problems like heart disease, stroke, and type 2 diabetes.
So it's like a chain reaction of risks. Psoriasis could lead to metabolic syndrome, which then leads to even more serious health issues.
Yeah, it's a complicated picture. And to make matters even more complex, the article also points to a possible link between psoriasis and certain types of cancer, lymphoma specifically.
Lymphoma, that's a cancer of the immune system, right? Well, I guess that makes sense considering psoriasis is thought to be an immune-mediated disease.
Exactly. And this connection really reinforces the idea that psoriasis is more than just skin deep. It involves the immune system, genetics, environmental factors, and it can potentially lead to a whole cascade of other health issues.
That's a lot to take in. It kind of makes you wonder what you can do to reduce those risks if you have psoriasis.
I know, it can feel overwhelming. But the good news is that there's a lot of research happening, and the article goes into some of the latest advancements in treatment options. There's definitely reason to be hopeful.
Okay, good. What are some of the newer treatments they're looking at?
Well, one of the most exciting areas is biologic therapy. These are medications that target specific parts of the immune system that are involved in psoriasis.
Oh, so instead of just suppressing the whole immune system, like some older medications do, biologics are more focused on calming down the inflammation that's causing the psoriasis.
Exactly. And because they're more targeted, they tend to have fewer side effects than some of the older drugs like methotrexate or cyclosporine.
That's good to hear. But I'm guessing there's still potential risks with those medications, right?
Of course, every medication comes with its own risks and benefits. It's really important to talk to your doctor and make sure you understand everything before starting any new treatment.
For sure. And I imagine those conversations also include things like lifestyle changes, right? Like diet and stress management, which we talked about with the Ayurvedic perspective.
Absolutely. The article emphasizes how important those lifestyle modifications are for managing psoriasis. Things like keeping a healthy weight, quitting smoking, managing stress can all make a big difference in how severe the disease is and how you feel overall.
It's interesting how both modern medicine and Ayurveda are coming to the same conclusion about the importance of lifestyle, even when it comes to a complex condition like psoriasis.
I know, right? It's like these two completely different systems of medicine are converging on some basic truths about health and well-being.
It really speaks to the power of taking a holistic approach, looking at the whole person and making choices that support health on every level. And speaking of supporting health through lifestyle choices, you also sent in an article from the New York Times about diet and psoriasis. Curious to see what they have to say about that.
Yeah, that article is really helpful. It gets into the specifics of what foods might make psoriasis worse and what foods might help.
Okay, I'm all ears. Give me the rundown on diet and inflammation. Where do we even start?
Well, they highlight the usual suspects when it comes to inflammation: processed foods, refined sugars, and saturated fats. Those are often linked to a lot of chronic health conditions, not just psoriasis.
So cutting back on those is probably a good idea for everyone, right? Not just people with psoriasis.
Definitely. It's a good step towards better health in general. But they also mention something a little more surprising: nightshade vegetables.
Nightshade vegetables, like what are those exactly?
Things like tomatoes, potatoes, eggplant, and peppers. They contain a compound called solanine that some people find irritating to their gut and their skin.
Interesting. So it's not necessarily about avoiding those foods completely, but more about paying attention to how your body reacts to them.
Exactly. It's all about personalized nutrition. You got to be your own food detective.
Ah.
If you notice your psoriasis flares up after eating nightshades, you might want to cut back and see if it makes a difference.
I like that. Be your own food detective.
Yeah.
So we've talked about what to avoid, but what about foods that can actually help with psoriasis? What should people be eating more of?
Well, the article recommends fatty fish like salmon, mackerel, sardines, all those good omega-3 fatty acids.
Omega-3s, those are the healthy fats, right?
Yep. And they're great for reducing inflammation.
Awesome. What else?
They also say to load up on colorful fruits and vegetables, lots of antioxidants to protect your cells and fight inflammation.
It's like eating the rainbow.
Yeah,
Plus, I bet all those colorful pigments are good for our skin in other ways, too.
probably. And they also suggest using anti-inflammatory spices in your cooking, things like turmeric, ginger, garlic. They add flavor and help fight inflammation at the same time.
It's like sneaking in extra medicine with every bite.
Right. Oh, and they emphasize staying hydrated by drinking plenty of water.
That makes sense. Helps flush out toxins and keeps your skin hydrated from the inside out.
And lastly, they talk about the importance of fiber. A high fiber diet supports healthy digestion and helps get rid of waste products, which can indirectly reduce inflammation and improve skin health.
So lots of fruits, veggies, and whole grains.
Exactly. Fiber is key for keeping everything running smoothly.
Wow, we've covered a lot of ground today. We've talked about the science of psoriasis, explored some ancient wisdom from Ayurveda, and gotten some really practical dietary advice. It feels like we've only just scratched the surface of this whole topic, though.
It's true, these deep dives always make you realize how much there is to learn, but that's the beauty of it, right? It sparks your curiosity and makes you want to keep exploring.
And speaking of exploring, we still have one more source to unpack, that piece from the New York Times. It seems like the perfect way to wrap up our deep dive and leave our listeners with something to think about, literally and figuratively.
I agree. That article brings up a really interesting connection between the mind and skin health, which feels like a perfect bridge between the modern and traditional perspectives we've been talking about today.
I'm excited to see where this last piece of the puzzle takes us, this New York Times article, The Worst Foods for Psoriasis and What to Eat Instead. It seems like it really gets into the nitty-gritty of how to manage psoriasis through diet.
Yeah, definitely. It hits on a lot of what we've already talked about, like the role of inflammation, but it also brings up something I find really interesting, this idea that your skin might be trying to tell you something, like about your overall health.
Hmm, that's fascinating. So you're saying our skin is kind of reflecting what's going on deeper inside us.
Exactly. Think about it. We talked about how Ayurveda sees skin conditions like Kushtha as signs of dosha imbalances, right? And those imbalances can be affected by all sorts of things, from what you eat to how you live your life to your emotional state. Well, this article is kind of hinting at a similar idea. It suggests that psoriasis might be a sign that something's out of balance in your life, not just in your skin.
So it's not just about treating the symptoms on the surface,
Yeah.
but about figuring out what's causing that imbalance in the first place.
Yeah, it's like your scare is trying to get your attention, Maybe it's pointing to stress you haven't dealt with or emotional stuff that's weighing you down, or even just the sensitivity to certain foods that you haven't noticed before.
It makes me think about that Ayurvedic concept of karma again.
Mm.
It's like both Ayurveda and this article, even though they come from totally different places, are saying that our health isn't just about physical stuff. It's about our mental and emotional well-being too, maybe even our spiritual side.
Right. It's a really powerful concept, and it challenges us to look at our health in a more holistic way. Instead of just covering up the symptoms, we need to dig a little deeper and figure out what's really going on.
It's almost like our skin is like a canvas, and the psoriasis is like a brushstroke that's highlighting something we need to pay attention to.
I love that analogy. It's a beautiful way to think about it, and it reminds us that true healing goes beyond just fixing the physical problem. It's about finding that sense of balance and harmony within yourself.
So where do we even begin to approach healing on that level?
That's where it becomes really personal. There's no magic formula that works for everyone. It might involve exploring different diets, trying out stress reduction techniques, or even getting into things like mindfulness and meditation. It's about finding what works for you, what helps you create a lifestyle that truly nourishes you, mind, body, and spirit.
This deep dive has taken us so much further than just understanding the science of psoriasis. It's like we've stumbled onto a whole new way of thinking about health and healing altogether, a way that acknowledges how connected everything really is.
Totally. It's been amazing to explore all these different sources, from ancient wisdom to the latest research, and it just shows how important it is to stay curious and open-minded.
And even though we've reached the end of this particular deep dive, I feel like it's just the beginning of a much bigger journey for all of us.
That's the cool thing about knowledge, right? It opens up all these new doors and makes you want to keep learning and growing.
We've given you the tools and a starting point, but the real adventure begins now as you take all this information and make it your own. And remember, you don't have to do this alone. There are so many people out there who are just as passionate about understanding and managing psoriasis. Don't be afraid to connect with others and share your experiences.
That's such a good point. Community and support are so important, especially when you're dealing with something as complex as psoriasis.
Well, on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into the world of psoriasis.
It's been a pleasure exploring all these fascinating sources with you.
And a huge thank you to you for joining us on this journey. Remember, every deep dive is a unique adventure tailored just for you. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep into all the amazing knowledge that's out there waiting to be discovered.